Hey folks, welcome back to the Holy Comforter Episcopal Church YouTube Bible study. I'm Jimmy Abbott, the priest here at Holy Comforter. Well, actually not here, as you can tell. I'm not at church, I'm at home. I had some meetings out and I thought I would come home and do this video. If you hear my dogs, Lady and Murphy, just disregard them. The gospel for this Sunday is Luke chapter 4, verses 14 through 21. This is Jesus' first sermon. He's been baptized. He's been led out into the wilderness by the Spirit to be tempted. Now it says in verse 14 that the Spirit has filled him again, and he returns to Galilee. People begin to hear about him, and he goes throughout all the synagogues, and then he comes to Nazareth where he had been brought up. He goes in the synagogue, he picks out the scroll of Isaiah, and he reads from it, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This is Jesus' first sermon. It's his first public proclamation of what he intends to do in his ministry. Do you remember in high school or college when your English professor said, make sure you have a strong thesis statement? This is Jesus' thesis statement. It's what he intends to do with his entire life. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, let the oppressed go free, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. I have two thoughts on that. One is, first of all, I think everybody in their own life should have their own thesis statement. What is their vision? What is their goal? What is the thing that is driving you to follow Jesus day by day? What are those principles that you wish to live by? What's your vision statement? The other is that this is a pretty radical message. Good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, let the oppressed go free, proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. We must be so bold as to think that if it is not these things, then it is not the good news of Jesus Christ. If it is not release and recovery of sight, if it is not the release of oppression, if it's not proclaiming the year of the Lord's favor. Remember, the year of the Lord's favor in the Old Testament was when all debts were released, when slaves were let free. It was a recalibration, a reorientation of society, a sort of resetting of the playing field. So we'd have to say, if it is not those things, if our work is not that, if the work of the church does not fit into what Jesus is saying here, then we have to ask ourselves, is it really the good news? Are we really carrying out the work of the gospel? In verse 20 it says, "And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down." Interesting note, the old rabbis would preach by sitting down. It says, "The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, 'Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing.'" The way that is structured, that sentence is structured in Greek, the syntax, today is emphasized. Jesus is saying, today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Not tomorrow or when I get around to it, or in the church, not after we've passed a resolution and created a committee to study the problem. No, Jesus is going to be doing these things right now. Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. What he's saying is to those ancient Jews, all of those things that you've been waiting for and hoping for, they are now embodied in me, in the work that I am doing today. So I ask you to reflect. What are the things that you are doing with urgency? Are they the things that you ought to be doing? Is it the work of the gospel that you are carrying out with urgency, or are you letting some of that work of discipleship take the back burner? This is a really rich lesson, and it's something that we all can really wrestle with and think about our own thesis statement, our own vision of how we wish to carry out the Christian life. Thank you all for joining me here in my home. As you can see, this is our wall of all of our family members, both the living and the dead. So you get to join me and them in studying the scriptures. Thank you for joining me.